Please turn your Bibles to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13. It's been a joy to work my way through this book and just to see how many things I've never seen before. As you work through the book more slowly, things sink in better, and then you just are blown away by all the things that have been said in the past in a certain way and how they've developed over time in this book. So as we study this morning, what we're getting to is a section that reminds us a lot of things that have gone on before in the book of Matthew. And so we're going to be seeing how some things are developing in this book as we study together. Have you ever been offended? What offended you? Just think for a second about being offended and what offended you, and how you reacted whenever you were offended. Maybe somebody has done something that we feel like is an overstep. They've condemned something about us, right? They've said we're doing something wrong. We're not living our life right. We're not raising our children right. We're making some mistake somewhere, somehow. How did that make us feel? And how did we respond? Did we stop to evaluate whether the thing they said was true? Or did we respond by seeking to offend them? And trying to help them to understand that they are the reason we make these mistakes, or that there's some other excuses behind our mistakes and the reasons why we are the way that we are. How do we respond when we are offended? It's funny how whenever we make mistakes, we tend to get really upset and we try to offend other people, hoping, really, if I'm honest with myself, I'm hoping that they will be shamed into apologizing, and then I can completely ignore whatever it was that they said that I'm doing wrong without ever stopping to evaluate whether it's true or false. We're going to study a few verses this morning, not very much, in the book of Matthew, chapter 13, verses 53 through 58. And it's going to tell us a story about a group of people who were offended. And then we're going to try to evaluate ourselves and think about how we can grow going forward in thinking about people offending us and how we respond. Let's start out reading this text. Matthew 13, verse 53, beginning, it says, "And when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming to his hometown, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, 'Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things?' And they took offense at him. But Jesus said to them, 'A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and in his own household.' And he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief." In this text, we see Jesus returning to his hometown. He's spoken a number of parables because the people aren't listening to him anymore. And so he now speaks in parables to conceal and reveal some great truth. But after he's done with those parables, he decides to return to his hometown. Now think for a second, if you're here this morning, or if you're tuning in and you're living in a place that is not your hometown, or you've ever lived in a place that is not your hometown, what is it like to return to your hometown? You ever been given the feeling that, the prodigal son returns, that you have somehow betrayed your family and your friends by moving away and living somewhere else or doing something else? How do people around you in your hometown feel about you whenever you return? Do they think you're the same person you were when you left and assume that nothing has changed and that you're back? You must have lost everything. You're returning with your tail tucked between your legs, kind of a mentality. So this is the typical thing that we might expect in returning to hometowns. I've got, my hometown is Union Hill, Alabama, North Alabama, little bitty town. Went to school there all my life. Went from kindergarten all the way to 8th grade, Union Hill Elementary School, and then moved on to Brewer High School and didn't move around a lot. So I know the people there, and I'm friends with them on Facebook now. And so I get to see the people from my hometown. A lot of the people I went to school with are now teachers at the school that I went to. I've got a lot of memories of that school, walking through the halls, seeing the students, seeing the teachers. I know a lot of those people, or I knew them. And I imagine a lot of you have a lot of those same kinds of memories. But if I were to go back there today, I would not be the same person that they knew back then. And so now we see Jesus, having been gone for a few years, maybe a couple years, returning to his hometown. And we just kind of wonder, why are you doing that? Why would you go back there? Why would you go to Nazareth? Remember, he's from Nazareth. Remember, Nathanael said in John 1:46, can anything good come from Nazareth? I mean, this is a little bitty podunk town in the middle of nowhere. And why would Jesus want to go back there? Well, if you remember back in chapter 12, Jesus' family had come to him and they were seeking him because the Pharisees had said he's casting out demons by demons, and then he comes back at them and he's kind of arguing with them, and then he goes and he starts speaking to people in a house, and his mother and his brothers are coming to him, and he doesn't go to them. He doesn't talk to them. He just says, these are my mothers and my brothers and my sisters. Everybody who does the will of God is my mothers, my brothers, my sisters. And we don't get a picture that he even talks to his family. Like, does he even care about his family? Well, now we see him returning to his hometown after no one else has been listening to him, and he's been speaking to them in parables. And we just kind of wonder, maybe that has something to do with him coming back. Maybe he now seeks to spread the gospel in his hometown to help them understand what's really going on. Maybe they're getting confused about who Jesus is and what he's trying to accomplish and what he's doing. I imagine this little town has a gossip ring that has been talking about Jesus. He's the hometown guy. And he's been everywhere, and he's famous, and everybody's going to him and learning from him and seeing great miracles from him. So Jesus returns to his hometown, and we see him going into their synagogue and teaching. His desire is that they too might understand the gospel. Well, the people listened to his teaching, and it says they were astonished. They were astonished. They were blown away at the words of Jesus. And they say, where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? You look at it very closely. Verse 54 says it, and then also verse 56 repeats it after talking about how we know him, we know his family. They say, where did this man get this wisdom and these works? They can't believe it. This is not the same man who left. This is somebody totally different. Jesus certainly wasn't like this. But what those words indicate, as we think about them a little bit more, is doubt that these things are from God. Where did this man get these things? Well, shouldn't that be obvious? You just kind of wonder what's been said about Jesus in his hometown. As his own family comes to try to get him, you kind of wonder if word has gotten around that You remember Jesus? Yeah, he's crazy now. The Pharisees are saying he's casting out demons by Beelzebul, the prince of demons. And here comes Jesus teaching in the synagogue. And they're like, man, this is nothing like we ever have seen before. And this man, maybe this all comes from Beelzebub. Where does this man get these things? And they focus in on his pedigree, right? And on his ancestry and on his family. Look at his family. Look at his father. He's a carpenter. Look at his mother. Look at his brothers and his sisters. He has brothers. He has sisters. They're ordinary. Everything about Jesus seems so ordinary. How in the world could something special come out of something so ordinary? Surely he's now been taken over by Beelzebul, or surely something has happened to him. It says in verse 57, they took offense at him. They were offended. They were offended? Why in the world would they be offended? Now, if you or I have a neighbor that we don't know real well, but, we get the picture, we wave at them, they're just kind of this ordinary guy. And then they disappear for a couple years, and then they come back and they say, I'm going to be the next president. What? No, you're not. What? He's lost his mind. There's no way he's going to be the next. He's this ordinary guy that's been living right up the road from me. There's no way he's going to be the next president. And we might just, say whatever. But would we be offended by him? What does that mean, to be offended? You go back to chapter 11 and you notice something that Jesus says when John the Baptist sends his disciples. John's imprisoned and he sends his disciples to Jesus and they ask him, are you the one who is to come or should we look for another? And Jesus answers them, tell John, the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the lepers are cleansed, and the dead are risen. But at the end he says, blessed is the one who is not offended by me. John was wondering, could this really be Jesus? Is he really the Messiah? Just like these Nazarenes were wondering, is this really him? And John, it seems, is close to being offended because Jesus is healing instead of judging. Jesus doesn't match up with his expectations. Well, as we go into Nazareth and we think about the Nazarenes, we see, of course, they're offended because Jesus was not the best Nazarene by their standards. He does not match up with what they would expect the Messiah to be. As he's preaching and teaching the good news that the kingdom of heaven is at hand and that he is the king of the kingdom of heaven, as these kinds of things are being implied in the words and the actions of Jesus, they're offended, thinking there's no way. This guy over here is better than Jesus. Or, I am better than Jesus because I'm more popular, right? I mean, think about this. You were in high school, you remember there's all these people in high school, and then there's the popular crowd. Do you think Jesus fit in with the popular crowd? Do you think Jesus was the most notable, the most loved, because he was like everybody else and liked to be exalted above everybody else? Do you think that's who he was? No. So they're offended. They think, no way, this can't be Jesus. This can't be the Messiah. Jesus is telling them the truth, but it doesn't line up with what they already believe. So they're offended because it doesn't match up with my expectations. You know, it's kind of funny. Whenever someone tells us the truth, our immediate response is never to go and hug that person and thank them for telling us something that is true and different from what I've always believed. Whenever I hear something different from what I expect, or from what I've always believed and what I've maybe even been preaching and teaching to other people and shown myself to be a strong proponent of, and somebody tells me something the opposite, I have feelings of shame and guilt and remorse for going on and on about this being the truth when it's not. And in order to overcome the feelings of shame and guilt that I feel, I become proud, and I become obstinate, and I become hardened, rejecting that it could possibly be true. And this is what's happening in Nazareth. There's no way that Jesus is the best in the world. Isn't this amazing? Jesus is from heaven, right? Jesus is the best human to have ever existed on the planet Earth. And the people who've known him for most of his life give him no honor whatsoever. And as a result, he leaves and doesn't do any mighty works because of their unbelief. I mean, this whole story, as I'm reading through, I really wanted to fit in a lot more information, but as I'm reading through it, I'm looking at this story, I'm like, there's just so much here to think about and to dwell on. Like, this is amazing. This is people who've known Jesus his whole life, rejecting him. Wow. What a statement that is. What do we learn from this text? First of all, the most famous prophecy, probably the most well-known, is Isaiah 53. And in the first 3 verses of Isaiah 53, it says this: "Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not." Jesus grew up without form or majesty. He wasn't head and shoulders above everybody else like Saul. He wasn't the most beautiful man in Nazareth. He wasn't from the wealthiest family. He didn't have the best pedigree. And God said that's exactly what his Messiah would be like. No one esteemed him as the most important human to ever walk the earth. Isn't that amazing? Philippians 2 is a passage that we refer to often, we think about often. It was even mentioned in our opening prayer. It tells us that Jesus was willing to come down from heaven above. Have this mind in yourself, which was yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. This little story that we're reading reinforces this very idea that Jesus lived on the earth in complete humility and servitude. He never exalted himself. He is God in the flesh, and he never once exalted himself to make people think, well, this must be the Messiah because look at how wonderful he is and how strong he is and how great he is. He's God in human form. And he's rejected because he can't be the Messiah. He's too weak. He doesn't look like the Messiah. He's not strong and mighty, and he doesn't look like the perfect one that we would expect. This just sounds so much like Saul and David. Remember, Saul was head and shoulders above everybody. He's beautiful. He's from a wealthy family. And when Samuel is told to go and replace Saul, he goes to the house of Jesse. And whenever he's there, the first one he sees is the firstborn. And he says, "Oh, surely the Lord's anointed is before me." And God says, "I haven't chosen him. You look at the outer appearance, but I look at the heart." And that's what makes Jesus amazing, is not his outer appearance. And that's what threw everybody off. He wasn't this beautiful, majestic human. He had the heart that was perfect, that desired to do the will of God above everything else. The Nazarenes were judging based on the pedigree of the man. But God is looking at his heart, and he says, "This is the perfect image that glorifies me." But the thing that we learn from all of this is that people are often offended when they proudly believe that they know something is the truth. They just knew exactly what the Messiah was going to look like. And because Jesus didn't line up perfectly with that picture that they had, they rejected him. Now, the truth was handed to them on a silver platter to be accepted and to be enjoyed so that they can receive the blessings of Jesus being from their hometown. But that truth did not line up with what they wanted to believe about themselves and about the Messiah. And so they're rejected. And those who are offended because they cannot accept the truth that is handed to them on a silver platter are not blessed. So how should we respond? The good news is that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the one who offers each of us salvation freely if we will just turn our hearts to the Lord and seek after and serve him and submit to him. But what if Jesus offends me? What if he teaches me something that I don't really like, that I don't agree with, that I've not believed, that I've not lived my life following? It goes completely against everything I've always stood for. I have stood on my head and preached this thing is true, and Jesus contradicts it. What should we do? You know, a few years ago, a TV show came out called The Bible. I was excited. I pre-ordered it. I was like, this is going to be great. Jesus in that story is this supermodel who is 6'4". I mean, he's above everybody else, and he's just this beautiful man, and he is walking the streets and just loving everybody, and he never offends anybody. But people are just offended if they want to be. But he never says anything out against them. He never says anything that would go against our culture today in the story. You don't read the full Sermon on the Mount. You don't listen to the full Sermon on the Mount in the Bible story because it's offensive. You don't hear the parables about certain hell and judgment for those who continue to live evil lives pursuing their own sins. You don't hear that in that story because it's offensive. Because we reject the Jesus that would say such things. But the truth is, his word is offending us to help us. If we give somebody the truth, we're not trying to hurt them or make them upset. We're trying to help them correct the false truth that is inside of them. We deceive ourselves into believing something is true that's not true. And if Jesus comes along and gives us the truth, it's not because he's mean, and the guilt and the shame and all that we feel inside of us is because he loves us and he wants us to turn away from those things. If we're not careful, we will have pride and pursue those things anyway, rather than submitting to the will of God. As you study this story, you learn that Jesus was human, just like each and every one of us. We learn that he understands completely everything that we're going through. He's providing us with the absolute truth as clearly as he can to try to convince us of that truth. And we have to choose not to be offended and to reject it, but to accept Jesus is the King. He's worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our honor. He's worthy of us submitting our will to him with whatever the command is. And he's even worthy of us going out into the world and speaking these very things that will offend others. When Jesus goes to his hometown, they make all kinds of excuses. They refuse to accept Jesus. We can expect the exact same things. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 1. Consider your calling, brothers. Verse 26. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. You see how in this text he tells us that God chose the foolish things that seem completely insignificant to men to shame the wise. He sets up this man who seems very ordinary and he makes him into the greatest king the world has ever known. What man can exalt himself now to say that I'm better than the lowest of men, when the lowest of man became greater than anybody? We have no idea what we're doing. When we are offended by the simplicity of the gospel, when we're offended by the truth that cuts us deeply and makes us reevaluate ourselves, we think we're so wise, as we come up with excuses and reasons to continue to do those things when we're really just being very, very foolish. But aren't you grateful that Jesus chooses foolish people who humble themselves and realize the mistakes that they've made? He came down from heaven to earth to save foolish people. I'm foolish, and I need that salvation. What about you? If you're here this morning and you're too proud to admit your own foolishness, you're not going to receive the blessing that God wants to give you. That guilt and that shame that you feel that you want to suppress, you want to act like isn't real, that you're really an okay person, that everything's really okay, don't suppress it. Don't do what we've all done. Submit to God and receive his grace. If you need to do that, please come as we stand and as we sing.